Okay, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. This is the public input session for getting input from Carlisle residents about the 2019 deer hunt. So my name is Jonathan DeCock. I live at 130 Oak Knoll Road, and I am the chair of the deer committee this year. I am also the representative of the Trails Committee on the deer committee. For the record, I am not a hunter. I got into this because, well, somebody needs to be here from Trails, and I actually believe in the science that says that the deer are the overpopulation of deer is damaging our forests. So I thought this was a way that I could help out. Just so you all know, we are on TV tonight, and we are being recorded. It will be available on YouTube, Facebook, you name it. It's all over the place. So please keep that in mind. When you, why don't I run around and do a quick introduction with the other members of the Deer Committee that are here tonight, and then we'll talk about what we're going to actually do tonight and the order of events. All right? So.
Okay, my name's Dan Boyanich. I'm the deer agent for the town, and I'm also one of the hunters.
My name's John Keating. I'm a member at large, and I'm also one of the deer hunters in Carlisle.
Good evening. My name is Alex Parra. I'm a member of the Conservation Commission and the vice chair of the Deer Committee.
My name is Todd Thorson. I represent Board of Health.
And I'm Barney Arnold, 225 Lowell Street, and I'm here as a member of the Board of Selectmen, and I'm not a hunter.
Okay, so our purpose tonight is, as I said, to gather public input. So that's most of what we're going to spend most of our time on. But to get things started, our deer agent has prepared a recap of what happened in 2019, including some of the things that we learned during that time. And then Alex is going to talk about based on those learnings, what we're going to do, or what we would like to do, or what we're proposing to do for the changes to the regulations this year. And then we're going to open it up for public input, okay? Because we are on TV, I'm going to ask people who have public input to please step forward to this mic at the lectern here. That way you can actually be heard on TV, okay? Like we did here, I'll ask you to state your name and address so that we know who we're talking to. Please address your questions to me as chair, or your comments or remarks to me as chair. Limit your speaking time to some reasonable number of minutes so that other people can also get their input in. If it goes on too long, I'll ask you to step aside and let someone else have a turn. Please do not interrupt another speaker, whether it's someone at the desk up here or someone in the audience who's speaking. If anyone is speaking, please let's have some appropriate decorum and not interrupt them. As far as tonight's situation is, we're intending to receive the input from you. We're not intending to debate the input here. We have regular meetings where we can discuss and debate that. We may ask for some clarifying questions. So if we don't understand what you're talking about, then we'll ask for essentially more information about it. But this is definitely not intended to be a back and forth debate, especially not on the merits of deer hunting. That I think would degrade quickly. So with that starting, I think I'll turn it over to Dan to recap the 2018 season. All right.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I just thought I'd better start off just trying to get everybody up to speed a little bit for those of you who may not be familiar with what we have. So the Deer Control Committee have a site on the Town of Carlisle website, and on that page that we have, there should be appropriate links to various reports, frequently asked questions, and so on. So if there's any information that you would like, you should be able to find it from that page. One of those links is actually the 2018 deer hunt report. And I've got a copy here, but you can actually print off a copy. It's a PDF file, so you should be able to download it very easily. And what I'll be presenting here is really just a very brief summary of the contents of this, with a little bit of background information, hopefully to get everybody up to speed in terms of what we have done to date. So I'll go on to the first slide, really just to sort of highlight why Carlisle implemented the deer hunt. And several committees over several years have expressed concern that there is a deer overpopulation. And that's actually also paralleled by Mass Wildlife, who have over several years been actually looking at this problem, particularly in Zone 10, this part of eastern Massachusetts. And based upon Mass Wildlife estimates, they estimate that in Carlisle we have a density of somewhere in the order of 30 to 60 deer per square mile, and that in order to have a balanced ecosystem, that we would need to have somewhere in the order of 12 to 20 deer per square mile. So the population is more than double, up to treble of what it should be. Now the impact of that is considerable. There's an impact on vegetation. We've talked a lot about forest deforestation, the understory being impacted severely, but also there is an impact on farms and also on gardens, and several of you may be impacted by this already. In addition to that, the impact on the vegetation has impact on other ecosystems and wildlife, and that's resulting in a reduced biodiversity of other species. On top of that, of course, when there is a large deer population, you get undernourishment of deer. They start starving in the winter because they're competing for very limited resources. There's also there are a considerable number of deer collisions. We actually monitor the police blotter reports, and you'll actually see in one of the frequently asked questions on the website, there is a link to full documentation which shows all the police blotter reports dating back several years. And I think at the moment we're averaging somewhere in the order of 30 or so incidents per year. Finally, and this is being disputed by certain individuals, but there is evidence that the deer are involved in the life cycle of the deer tick, resulting in an increased incidence of Lyme disease, and therefore a reduction in the deer would directly result in a decreased incidence of Lyme disease. So that's basically that background. Now, as far as the work that was actually done to implement the hunt, 2018 was our first year, and we really viewed that as a pilot to really see how can we put all these various elements together into a successful deer hunting program. The Deer Committee was sanctioned by the Board of Selectmen, and we had our first meeting back in June 2017. And since then, in order to actually institute the pilot, we actually put into place a lot of these items. We acquired data from other towns and agencies really to see how they did, how they undertook deer hunting. We put together our regulations. We decided that bow hunting only should be allowed, that there would be no shotgun or muzzleloader hunting, although that is allowed within town on private property. We selected the hunting parcels, we created signage, hunter selection process was implemented, and we incorporated public feedback from several sessions. And finally, we implemented a limited season between October the 1st and November the 24th of last year. 18 hunters were selected, and 7 of those were Carlisle residents. And we believe that we implemented the highest standards of any bow hunting program in Massachusetts. Importantly, we only selected hunters who had proficiency in showing that they had a bow hunter education certificate, that they were well trained in bow hunting. They had to have a hunting license, that's a state requirement. We undertook quarry checks for every hunter. All hunters were interviewed by members of the Deer Control Committee, and also we actually subjected them to a proficiency test. We selected 5 town parcels, and they were really selected based upon the size of the parcel, the terrain that was suitable for deer and hunting, and also the availability of parking. And those 5 parcels are shown here: Benfield, Conant, Davis, Greeno, both north and south of the dam and the town forest. It's important to emphasize that we actually imposed no restrictions on recreational land use during the hunt. So there was no leash requirement for dogs. All trails were fully open. Off-trail use was permitted, and there was no requirement for the public to wear hunter orange, or rather orange clothing. The outcome was that over that period, 10 deer were harvested, 1 in Benfield, 1 in Town Forest, and 8 in Davis. And if we actually look at statistics for Carlisle, in blue here, this histogram are the deer that have been harvested over those years by hunters on private property. And the last bar on the right shows the deer that were harvested on private property, and in red were those 10 deer that we actually contributed to. So in 2018, 49 deer were actually taken in Carlisle. It's important to note that, of course, we had a limited season. For those other figures in the blue bars, that would be the whole season extending all the way through to the end of December, and also included shotgun and muzzleloader hunting as well. So I think we made a significant contribution to the overall deer harvest. There were no safety issues, and signage was improved during the hunt following feedback, about halfway through. So, what were the learning points? What was the feedback and what were the concerns? Well, we did have 2 infractions. One infraction involved a hunter not removing entrails, and in one case, a hunter was discovered on private property. And in both cases, the hunters remedied very, very quickly. The entrails were removed the next day after it was reported, and the tree stand was taken down. Several members of the public were concerned about tree stand orientation. In the regulations, it did say that hunters should not shoot in the direction of the trails, but obviously there is a perception that if a tree stand is pointing in the direction of the trail, that is a concern. So we've taken that into consideration. There was also a concern about the location of trail cameras, and also we had feedback in terms of when the hunters were actually hunting, could there be a way of being able to adjust that so that members of the public could feel comfortable hunting when the hunters were not there to actually do the hunting themselves. So we've taken all of this feedback and these learning points and incorporated those into the 2019 regulations. So I'll now hand you over to Alex, who will give you a synopsis of the new regulations.
Thank you, Dan. Just a little bit more background. In the beginning of July, the selectmen asked the Deer Committee to review the 2018 regulations and make recommendations to the selectmen for any, proposed changes to the regulations. The Deer Committee since then has had 2 sessions to discuss and draft proposed changes to the regulations, and we've come up with a set of proposed regulations that's on the town Deer Committee website for the public to look at. As we said at the beginning of this meeting, we're looking for public input at this point, and we will be having another meeting actually this Friday to consider and incorporate the public input that we received tonight. We've also received some input from the Conservation Commission, and we will be discussing that input also at our August 2nd meeting. So, having said that, I think it might be helpful to first say what we haven't recommended any changes for from the 2018 regulations. It's still only bow hunting. The regulations still require compliance with all applicable state regulations. We have not recommended any changes to the parcels on which hunting was permitted last year. It's still limited for each hunter to specifically assigned areas, and the basic qualifications for participating in the program that Dan described earlier remain the same. So we then made a set of changes which I would describe really as organizational and trying to clarify the roles of the various people in the program. The set of regulations in 2018 kind of talked about the town of Carlisle will do this, town of Carlisle will do that. We tried to make clear who is meant by that in the regulations. So in a very sort of general way, I would say that the regulations as we've now set them up looks to the Selectmen and the Conservation Commission for overall responsibility for the program and the regulation of the town parcels involved. The Deer Committee is charged with administration of the program, and the Deer agent is kind of a man on the ground, person on the ground, looking on a day-to-day basis to monitor the program. So what have we recommended in terms of changes? And Dan, if you could put the next slide. So the first area of changes, and Dan had mentioned that last year's season ended November 24th. We're recommending that the season be extended to December 20th, but that is offset by two options, and these are two options that we would really like your input on tonight. The first option is to permit Monday through Friday hunting and have Saturday during the season as a no hunting day. So that's one option. The second is to permit hunting Monday through Saturday, but limit the hours so it would be no hunting between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And I would say that to the extent we've received input both from boards and public so far, there hasn't been an overwhelming favorite amongst the options. So we would be interested very much to hear your thoughts on that subject. If you want to do the next slide. So the next general area of changes that we're recommending has to do with the setbacks. So in the regulations in 2018, it did say that there would be no hunting permitted within 100 feet of the marked trails, and that remains in the regulations. What we have added is to say that tree stands need to be set up at least 100 feet from marked trails. And if they're anywhere within the 100 to 150 feet from the trails, they have to face away from the marked trails. So that's a new set of regulations. And then to address the concern that Dan mentioned earlier, trail cameras, hunters' trail cameras have to be off the trails by at least 100 feet. You want to do the next slide? So the last set of substantive changes is entirely new in the regulations. The regulations in 2018 didn't provide any penalties for infractions. And so based upon, last year's experience, we have provided in the draft regulations that there are two sets of infractions which are going to disqualify you from the program permanently. And that's if you don't remove the entrails and if you're hunting on private property without owner permission. We've additionally added a set of, I guess what we would have considered potentially lesser infractions. And one is you have to qualify to be, and Dan had explained the qualifications earlier, you have to qualify to be in the program. If something happens during the hunting season that would make you disqualified, then you would lose your license for that season, and obviously you would have to re-qualify if you wanted in the following year. The second is the failure to correct any violation of town or state regulations when asked to do so. And the third is a more general provision that if the deer agent makes a reasonable request to change something that the hunter is doing and the hunter refuses to do so, that would be an infraction that would result in suspension of your license for the year. All of these infractions we've made reviewable by the deer committee to ensure, a fair process for the hunter as opposed to just somebody making the decisions. So that's the broad outlines of the changes. Again, if you want to look at the proposed regulations in detail, they are on the Deer Committee website. I did bring some extra copies with me tonight. Happy to leave them with everybody. And again, we are meeting again on August 2nd to review any input that we receive from you, as well as the input we've already received from boards and committees and others. And it's our goal to get a final set of recommendations to the selectmen by the middle of August. So I think that's
it.
summary.
Dan, can you kill the projector? We don't have lights shining in our eyes. Okay, so it's time for the public input. Again, I would remind everyone, please step forward to the lectern and address your remarks to me. You need to be at the lectern in order for people to hear you, not in this room, but on TV. And again, keep your remarks to a reasonable length of time so that others can also have input. So, who would like to go first?
George Mahalik, 94 Canterbury Court. About the days and times input, I would prefer not hunting on Saturday. I'm one of the hunters in town, and I'm a resident. And for the reason that if we take 2 hours of each day in the middle of the day, when a hunter comes, what it means to me is, as a hunter, at 10 a.m., I'm putting my arrow in my quiver, and I'm getting off my tree stand and walking back to where I came from. And so I'm going to be on the trail a half hour after 10 a.m. And in the other side of that, if I'm going back out at 2, I'm going to be on the trail at 1:30. So there's really only about an hour and a half, maybe an hour that there's going to be no hunters on any trails. And I think what concerns the residents as much is that they see a hunter. You don't want to see it. And I get that. I understand that. And I think that we're going to have issues if we try to manage it that way. I would rather give up Saturday and be able to hunt all day, because with deer movements and how they move all day long, especially when they go into rut, when they're breeding, which is when most hunters are successful. And if we're not there in the middle of the day, we're not going to be as successful. And if we can't come to terms with that, I'd rather just cut it back to the end of November and just, keep it the way it was, or, go back to the 24th or whatever it was. But I just, my own thoughts on it, and I put a lot of thought into it and try to look at it from each side, and that would make the most sense to me. So, thank you.
Next.
At 777 East Street. Why isn't it a penalty if the tree stand is not pointed towards, is pointed towards the trail, and it's 100 feet away if it's found? And if it's more than 100 feet away, you mentioned 150, then that's not a problem. But if it's with 150 feet pointing towards the trail, it should be a penalty that means that hunter will not be hunting that season or again.
Thank you.
List 46 Hemlock Hill. Ours is a household that opposes deer hunting. I wanted to just sort of clarify a little bit the math for the offsetting. Adding 3 weeks, extending the hunting season by 3 weeks really is not an offset for losing a maximum of 7 days if you're cutting back, not allowing Saturdays. You lose even less time for the hunters if it's only a few days a week. A few hours per day. So adding 3 weeks, basically when you are just losing 1 week of hunting. I just wanted to be a little more clear about that. Also, I wanted a clarification. If a deer is shot with an arrow and not killed, and then this injured deer ends up on private property, what happens then? Because I guess legally a hunter is not allowed to go onto the private property, follow that deer, and put it out of its misery, or complete the kill. So is that deer just left to roam the Carlisle woods injured? How does one reconcile that? What's the solution to that? And I just believe if overpopulation of deer is the problem, there are more humane ways of culling the population, as opposed to just shooting arrows and not necessarily killing it. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think when we get direct questions like that, we should go ahead and answer them if we can, right? So, Dan, I think you're best able to answer this one.
Okay, so I'll address the question about the deer going onto private property. So we've already got that in the frequently asked questions, and that is a hunter shoots the deer goes onto private property. The hunter has to ask the property owner for permission to enter. Now, the way that works is that we have an escalation procedure. If for whatever reason the hunter isn't given permission, then we call basically I get involved because the hunter also lets me know. I call the police. The police will ask for permission, so they'll be assisting the hunter in terms of going onto the property. If the owner still doesn't give permission, then we will get the environmental police involved. In principle, the owner has the final say. It's a question of ethics at that point. Do we let a deer die and not harvest it? So I think it's in everybody's interest really to just basically be as efficacious as possible and remove the deer from that property. But we want to do this in a proper way that is where the property owner is as comfortable as possible. So the hunter will not go on to private property without permission. Are there any other questions that need to be addressed?
That was it, I think. Okay. Yeah, if anyone wants to speak, go ahead and stand up and.
Hi, Stacy Lennon, 195 Stearns. So this topic is of new interest to me because we just moved and we abut Davis on two sides. And I have 2 young kids. So I have some questions, safety related. The thing that, and I know nothing about bow hunting, so I probably need to be educated. But the image that's in my mind is some stray arrow coming into my yard and causing mayhem, problem, fear, etc. When we're outside. So I had a couple questions about the buffers, 500 feet from a dwelling. I'm wondering, how is that measured? How is that enforced? How does a hunter know when they're within that buffer or not within that buffer? That's one question. Another is, are there any limits on the types of bows and arrows that can be used? Again, I don't know much about this, but I imagine some bows and arrows can shoot farther than others. My rapid Googling today showed oh, there's a thing called a compound bow. There are crossbows. There are others no more. And so it makes me wonder, what is the range of what's allowed? And does that pose any potential risks to be thinking about for just, I'm sure we have great hunters, but the bad shot here and there that winds up, going where nobody wants it to go. I think those are my main questions. Thanks.
You want to take those again, Dan?
Right. So as far as the 500 feet is concerned, these are Massachusetts regulations. Basically, a hunter is not allowed to hunt within 500 feet of an occupied dwelling without the homeowner's permission. And we actually have got quite a large amount of town land which is within 500 feet of a property, and that is out of bounds. So we have actually drawn up maps, and we give them to each hunter. It's actually on our, we have a file storage area, and all the maps are available. If you go onto our website, you'll be able to get to that. But the maps clearly delineate the areas that the hunters are allowed to hunt. And essentially, they're not allowed to hunt within 500 feet of a property without that owner's permission. So that is the buffer, effectively, that we have. The buffer also contains the 100 feet plus from the trails and so on. So you can see in the maps clearly outlined the area that the hunter is allowed to hunt and the area that the hunter is not allowed to hunt. So does that address your question for that?
It addresses the buffer question.
Okay.
Are there limits on what kinds of equipment is allowed?
Right, I'll come to that. So again, the mass regulations, Massachusetts has got a lot, it's highly regulated, the whole process. And the Massachusetts regulations are that a bow has to have a draw weight of at least 40 pounds in order to be used for hunting. So that's an ethical issue with respect to the power to be able to kill a deer. The hunters themselves have to be in tree stands, and those tree stands, the hunting position from which they shoot is usually around 20 feet up in the air, and a typical range for shooting at a deer is around 20 yards. So they're effectively shooting in a downward direction, and it's considered a very short-range activity. It's very safe in that there have been no incidents in Massachusetts history of a hunter ever having had an incident with another person or in fact any animal. It's a very precise activity. The hunter is really shooting at a very critical part of the body of the deer and so on. And they're not shooting at running deer. The deer walk by, and so it's a very slow, precise activity, very methodical, and as a result, it's extremely, extremely safe. As far as the bows are concerned, most hunters hunt with a compound bow. That is the bow that it's actually very accurate because it's got sights the hunter can hold. It's not like you see in the movies or anything like that. It is a very highly technical sort of piece of equipment and very precise. As far as the crossbows are concerned, we do have 3 hunters who hunt with crossbows. A hunter can only use a crossbow if they have a medical certificate which indicates that they cannot draw a compound bow back because they have a permanent disability in the shoulder or whatever, so they have to use a crossbow. But all the same rules apply. They have to be up in the tree stand, they shoot in a downward direction at the deer, and so it is, like I say, a very, very safe activity.
Let me add one more thing on the 500 feet. You asked how it's enforced. So one of the things that the Deer Control Committee is responsible for is making sure that that happens. So I think this year we're going to try to be more proactive, but in past years we just expected hunters to be in the right location, and if anyone in the public complained, then we would go out and confirm or deny that it was a problem. But I'm hoping this year we're more proactive.
And just to clarify, I have software which allows me to actually take the GPS coordinate of the actual tree stand and actually a property itself and actually measure it out myself. So. Do you want to go to the podium?
I just want to clarify something. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're allowed to hunt within 500 feet. So hunting would be walking in the woods with a bow. But I think the way the law reads is you can't discharge an arrow or a gun within 500 feet of a house. So if you see somebody walking in your back property line and you say, oh, they're not 500 feet, that's okay. They can walk there. That's part of hunting, but they can't discharge any bow or weapon within 500 feet. So as long as they're not discharging, then that would be okay. Am I correct in saying that?
That's correct. It's the discharge of the weapon.
Could you state your name and location? Excuse me, sir. Could you state your name and location?
Ken Prue, Carlisle, Elizabeth Ridge Road.
Thank you.
In Carlisle.
Jeff Freeman, 245 Rockland Road in Carlisle. My question is, when you're 500 feet from the dwelling, but the property line abuts a designated hunting area, I don't believe there's any setback, so the tree stand can be on the property line with the private property. And I asked if that's correct. So is there any
believe that
setback?
is correct.
Yeah. So our problem is I've got trails where I'm on there with my dog on our property, which is within 15 feet of my property line. We're there all the time, and so I'm very concerned where the tree stand is. And I would think it would not be unreasonable to have a setback from private property of 100 feet unless permission is given by the property owner that they can be within that 100 feet. And there are instances where that happens, particularly with our relationship and our land to the Conant land. So consideration should be given to that boundary of private property to designated shooting areas. Excuse me.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you thought would be an appropriate setback.
100 feet.
100 feet.
Unless permission is given by the property owner. And that would allow the property owner with your own trails on your land and your use of that land, knowing that the tree stand is 100 feet from that property line. That's just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jeannie Schoo. I'm at 898 Maple Street in Carlisle. I didn't expect to see a presentation by the Deer Committee, so I do have some suggestions for the regulations, but I do want to make a note that the Carlisle Lyme Disease Subcommittee, of which I used to be a member, actually came to the Deer Committee and said that this the Lyme disease is not a reason for the hunt. So, and the other small organization that may have a disagreement with the Deer Committee is the Kugler and other PhDs at the Centers for Disease Control also say that the hunt is not going to yield anything, not particularly for Carlisle, but for hunting in general, the deer. So these are very, very important people. So I just wanted you to know that. And I have other disputes, but I won't go into it here. What's most important for me is I was very involved with trying to stop the hunt. I'm against the hunt. It's violent and it doesn't serve a purpose. It doesn't protect anyone. And in particular, the reason for the hunt this past season was the claim that the understory was being irreparably damaged, although there was no criteria. When the Massachusetts came in and looked at the woods of Carlisle, they surveyed it in the winter season and compared it to understory in other towns during the spring and summer seasons. And I don't know about you, but I won't find any trillium or lady slippers in the winter in Carlisle. So anyway, there used to be sort of a criteria which I wrote to the Deer Committee and I said this isn't really very good criteria for the management. And the criteria was the agent will monitor the program to ensure public safety and compliance with land management goals. And I wrote to the Deer Committee and said there's no established land management goals in Carlisle. There has not been any survey of the properties to actually measure. We actually have the same deer density as the city of Boston, if you believe that, if you go by the maps provided by the state. And I don't think they really have a problem in Boston. And that has been replaced, that very simple statement that does not have any quantitative scientific data or pictures, has now been replaced by a sentence that says the Deer Control Committee will monitor the program to ensure public safety and the reduction of the deer population. If one deer were to be killed, then they would have met their goals. And this is not protecting the understory. So I think that what I had requested was quantitative information that shows that after a couple of years the hunt is doing something, and that has not been provided. Also, that I would like in the regulations that all documentation that is uploaded to the Deer Committee site be uploaded by the town clerk so that it remains there and is not cannot be moved on and off the site. So that would be great if that happened. I think right now data can be uploaded and down and taken away, and I particularly don't think that's good for the site. Let's see. Crossbow, I don't think anyone should be allowed to use crossbow. It's very dangerous, and there are accidents, and there's some people in Carlisle who can verify that for you, people who have been hunters that have basically had their children compete in the Olympics and are very qualified. So I think those people you need to look at. The selectmen can basically allow hunting on town lands for some safety issues. But I don't know if conservation land can be actually considered to be town land. So I don't know if the selectmen give permission for town land, whether that can actually go to conservation land. So Greeno, which did not have any deer killed last year, in fact, 4 of the 5 areas either had 0 deer or 1 deer killed, should really be off limits also because it's conservation land. And my understanding is there's a possibility of even less deer being killed this year because the acorn harvest or the acorn production was going to be much lower. So it really doesn't look very good as far as hunting, getting more deer. As far as permitting regulations in 8.4, hunters were asked to show identification last year. I did not ask to see anybody's identification, but it was considered harassment by the hunters. And so I would like the line added that that the hunters do have to read the regulations and that being asked to show credentials is not considered to be harassment. Hunters typically do not like to hunt between the hours, from what I understand on hunters on the Deer Committee. They don't like to hunt between 10 and 3 anyway. So if we were to extend the season and cut off the hunting time between 10 and 3, that would have happened anyway, so there's no reason for an extension of the hunt into December. And I think there's so much more I want to talk about, but I think that is it for right now. Thank you.
you.
George Mahalik, 94 Canterbury Court. I just wanted to address a couple misconceptions that were just brought up. Number one, there's plenty of evidence out there that deer contribute to Lyme disease because they transmit or transport the ticks. They might not be infected, but they will go to an area and get infected by the rodents. And there's proof in the pudding, so to say, that deer contribute to Lyme disease through transporting the deer larvae into other areas. And so Princeton University has come out and said that they allow hunting on university property. Let's address the crossbow. Crossbows are for disabled Americans, and it's in the hunting laws, and it's by a doctor. If we as a town limited crossbow hunting from disabled people, you're opening yourself up for lawsuit. Because if I had a shoulder injury and I wasn't allowed to hunt with a crossbow, where I was allowed to hunt before with a bow, because I'm disabled, I would own half the town by the time I'm done. Clearly. Yes. So then as far as crossbows, they don't cause any further damage than a regular compound bow. When you're shooting from 20 feet up to 20 yards out, your shot's like this. When somebody was talking about Olympic people having arrows shoot off, when you're shooting at the ground, if it goes off 5 feet, it's going to hit the ground. And it doesn't ricochet. They're carbon arrows. They disintegrate when you hit something. Unless it sticks in the ground. If it hits a rock, it blows up. It doesn't go anywhere. No one's in danger. You can't be hurt. No one's going to be hurt. This is the safest sport, believe it or not, safest sport in America. No injuries to any other people. You have more chance of dying playing lacrosse as a kid than walking through the woods and thinking a hunter's going to shoot you. It just isn't going to happen. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. Thanks.
All right. In general, I'd prefer if other people spoke first and repeat speakers could wait until everyone else is done. Just a thought. Okay. So how about other folks who we haven't heard from yet? Anybody?
Hi, I'm Kay Hurley. I live on School Street. I have a number of questions really on clarifications of these regs. And I don't know, Mr. Chairman, maybe I can address Barney directly. I'm wondering if the decision for a hunt in 2019 has actually been made yet, or we are considering regulations in case we have a hunt. So that would be one question.
Okay. Why don't we have you ask your questions and then we'll see if she can respond. Okay?
All right. So I printed out a copy of the regs, so thank you very much for posting those so we could look at them in advance. If we do go ahead with a hunt this year, can we assume that there will be the same number of hunters as last year? Because it says that the town parcels will be the same as last year. So it just makes me wonder if that means that we would have, if we do have the hunt, that there would be no more than 18 hunters again this year. So that's one just question of clarification there. I would like to know if the location of the tree stands is available to the public if somebody went into town hall and asked for it. On item number 5 about permits and qualifications, it talks about hunter education and bow hunter safety. I think education and safety are both pretty important. I wonder, though, about experience. and effectiveness. You know, the data point that we have for Carlisle is that 18 hunters over, roughly speaking, 8 weeks got 10 deer. And it doesn't strike me as effective. And we gave up quite a lot to achieve that result. And I noticed in the deer hunt report, which I also have a copy of here, and I'll quote from it, that the data given is for the number of hunters and deer harvested in Dover in 2010, Dover in 2012, and then Carlisle in 2018. And because the deer harvested per hunter was roughly the same as it was in Dover in 2010 and 2012, quote, we thus consider the Carlisle deer harvest to have been successful. So I don't know if in our criteria for success that we need to be at least as good as Dover was 6 or 8 years ago. I mean, what are we trying to do here? And so I have that question just about efficiency of the hunters. Are they proficient hunters? I'm happy that they're educated. I'm happy that they've got safety certificates. But I don't know about their effectiveness and their experience. On item 7, the DCC will monitor the program to ensure public safety. That was an issue that was brought up already. I would really like to see a little bit more detail on the protocol for this monitoring. I think last year the town kind of monitored itself. So how you folks intend to monitor the program would be, you know, useful to know. On item 7.2, hunters are encouraged to obtain antlerless deer permits and to harvest antlerless deer. I'm interested in knowing what is the nature of that encouragement. So if that could be spelled out, whatever encouragement was used last year, if there was any, resulted in 50-50. So clearly, if we want a better ratio, we need better encouragement. Then I got 9.1. This business about between 10 and 2 as an option, that there would be no discharge of arrows. I find that very difficult to understand, and how I would know the difference between a hunter in his stand not discharging an arrow, which is probably most of the time, especially given last year's data, how many deer were taken. Not many arrows were ever discharged. So no discharge of arrows doesn't mean the hunter can't be in his stand. And how would a person know that if a deer turned up right now, the temptation would be great? And also to police that, to monitor that, would be exceedingly difficult. So I think that language is problematic. I think if the town opts for that option of no hunting between 10 and 2, that it's made a bit more clear, so that if you're out in the woods and you see a hunter in his stand between 10 and 2, is that not a violation just because he didn't happen to be discharging his arrow right when you saw him? Okay. Sorry, I'm sorry to take the time here, but I've only got a couple more. On number 11, enforcement, the deer agent shall have authority to enforce these regs and issue cease and desist orders. Now, is that to cease and desist the behavior or to cease and desist hunting? Like, you're out of here. Or just stop what you were doing? Because we didn't, that's... So a little bit of clarification there would be good. And then on item B under section 11, there's the Deer Committee can revoke permits and subject to whatever immediately upon request of the deer agent. And then on item C also, if you failed to immediately comply with any reasonable request. And I appreciate this sense of immediacy and urgency on a lot of this, but I think it means we need to have emergency contact information for the deer agent to be readily available so that we could reach you, given, the wording and the immediacy of a lot of this stuff. And maybe you're doing that, but I don't know where it's posted right now. And then I briefly mentioned success criteria before, just based on what was in last year's deer report. I didn't see those success criteria as being what we in Carlisle should be looking at. And I'm wondering if the success criteria actually reside with the Deer Committee at all, or if they reside with the selectmen. Because if the Deer Control Committee is to enforce the regs and monitor a hunt, they can do their job. The overseer that declares whether this is successful or not, and that sets the goals for success, might need to be a separate body. That's the sum of my feedback on the regs. I did print out the agenda for the meeting, and it said something about I've misplaced it. No, here it is. You'll request input from the public on these proposals and any other topics relating to deer hunting on town land. I could take a bit of time. I choose not to tonight.
Thank you.
But I do want to mention what I think is the elephant in the room, which is the assumption, and I use that word, I choose it carefully, that we in fact have a deer problem. I think that's the elephant in the room that needs to be addressed, and I'll either save it for your next meeting or some other opportunity. But thank you very much for this opportunity.
Kay, before you sit down, may I ask you one question?
Yes.
So you mentioned the 10 to 2 and some of the difficulties in managing that. Do you have an opinion on 10 to 2 versus Saturday?
I don't.
Or versus a shorter season?
Yes. I think it was already mentioned by somebody that, and I echo that sense that I've gotten from hunters, I myself am not a hunter, that 10 to 2 is when there's the least activity. And giving up 10 to 2 is giving up nothing. And to use that as a vehicle for extending the season seems to me like a very poor deal. We gave up nothing. Well, we gave up, well, we gave up a lot, depends what angle you're looking at it from. But I don't know, there may be data on the hours in which the deer were taken last year. I don't know if the data is that precise or not. But you know, lots of hunters just say the reason they want to be out at dawn and dusk is that's when there's a lot of movement at those times of the day. And so to give up that and use it as a reason to extend the season just doesn't work for me at all. So I would like to see, if there is a hunt, no hunting between 10 and 2, and no extension to the season. That would be my third option.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No, that's good for now. Thank you. So much of the questions that you asked, I think, are things that need to be debated and discussed by the Deer Committee. However, I did note two that I think we can answer right away, which is, has the Board of Selectmen made a decision on the hunt, and is it going to be the same number of hunters? And so, Barney, I'll turn to you for the first one.
Hi. So the Board of Selectmen has charged the Deer Committee with sorry. The Board of Selectmen has charged the Deer Committee with coming up with these proposed regulations. So while we have not taken a formal vote to approve any regulations yet for a hunt this fall, but I think the assumption is that, yes, there will be a hunt this fall. And so when this process of input from both the public and from the various boards that are considering the draft regulations, once that process is completed, there'll be a set of regulations brought back to both the Board of Selectmen and the Conservation Commission, because it is correct that the lands that are under the control of the CONSCOM require that they also give approval to the regulations. So those will come back to those two boards with the goal, as Jonathan mentioned at the beginning, of having that happen by the end of August of this year.
Okay, and the second question on the same number of hunters, I believe I'll take that one, and the answer is yes. We're planning on the same number of hunters on the same parcels, and the basic reason for that is we've gotten started relatively late this year in getting this set up, and so trying to add more hunters or add more parcels is really not logistically possible for the Deer Committee to do that in this time frame. So it doesn't seem like a wise idea.
Jonathan, additional clarification, these would be the same 18 hunters too.
Unless any of them drop out.
Unless any,
then we'd
but by
add
and large,
new.
it's not a new lottery, and you wouldn't see a fresh group of people
Right.
who are not familiar with the town from last year.
Thank you, Todd. All right, I believe that's all we can answer right now, unless you guys saw something else that we should answer immediately. Okay. Thank you. Next.
Brendan Kavanaugh, 28 Sunset Road, friendly neighbor, also a bow hunter. First, I'd like to address just the fact that I'm in favor of this program. I think it's great that we can have multi-use properties, and I'm glad we're working through to share it with everyone. And I know that one of the biggest concerns of non-hunters is interaction between hunters and just safety in general. As a bow hunter, I don't want to see other people because that's where the deer aren't going to be. So I'm going to be in the gnarliest section of swampy, brushy, whatever. So it's not like I'm going to see you on the trail per se, unless I'm coming or going from a tree stand. So that being said, I'm in favor of option 1 of no Saturday hunting, and that way there's just less interaction between people hiking, biking, walking their dogs, whatever, and hunters, just to minimize that impact between those two groups. That's all I had to say. Great program. Thank you.
Roger Lane, 13 Moon Cove. I came from West Virginia So small game and big game is the way of life. So I understand the bow hunting and hunting people in general. But let's face it, hunting is not a sport. It's an entertainment, and we utilize public land, public facility to fulfill our entertainment. But I'm not here to address that. But what I do have is I have a question about the procedure, the answer the deer agents gave earlier about how to handle the situation of a wounded deer into private land. As far as I'm concerned, hunting in the mixed environment like residential and public land is really a kind of infringement to the ownership of the private land. Because if you have a deer that get hurt, run into a private land, you cannot finish the kill, and you have to rely on the agents. Let's face it, I can't even call the police and respond in case I get, when I get a auto emergency. Do I expect a deer that's running into somebody's land and that issue is going to be resolved? I don't think so. I don't think that's a good answer to the procedure of how to overcome that situation. Yes, the owner of the land have the responsibility. Are you going to find him within the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes, when a deer is running like mad? No, I don't think that's a solution. So, as I said earlier, hunting in the mixed land is imposing on the private ownership of the land. Now, I don't know what's the solution to that. I just have to accept the fact that we are using mixed land for entertainment. But let's be true about it. I hate to see people come up with all these explanation and excuses about, oh, this is for example, Lyme disease. If we want to kill Lyme, get rid of all the little critter, the four-legged, weasel or mice. They are the ones that carry the majority of the Lyme, or at least carry them to the size that they will come on to the deer. And if you're thinking about deer as a major contributor to deer Lyme problem, I think all the cats and dogs have to be treated the same way as deer. I'm a dog and I'm an animal lover. I'm a dog and cat lover. I don't hate to see people do the same thing to my dog and my cat. But don't use that as an excuse. I don't think that is not the way to what I call gilding that lily. Pretty it up. I think. One more thing I want to address in this meeting, what I heard, is about the tree stand. Now, we all know the tree stand is a stalking and shooting station. And why 100 feet? I don't understand that. I think what's the purpose of that rule to begin with? About 100 feet to the trail. Is that for safety? If it's for safety, then I think that the distance should be the maximum effective distance of any arm. Not 100 feet, or not 150 feet, because that is still within the effective distance, and that's not for safety. I don't know if this for other reason, which I haven't read, and then I have misspoken. So there's a lot of these things that I like to see this kind of thing that being addressed without all these, fog over it. And I'm very disappointed, with this meeting and all the goal, all the purpose, all the reason we're doing it. I mean, I've been on trail myself. I've been out hunting. I mean, when I went hunting with my friend, I just tag along just to learn what it's all about. I'm not even intended to shoot on anything. I learned a lot. On the subject of having law that say not discharge, That's another thing that I don't understand. I cannot get away with taking a fishing pole with a lure, no hook, and go onto Concord River and face a ranger or the fish and wildlife police. He will never accept the fact that I have a fishing pole and I'm only practicing casting. No. So when you get a bow and arrow and in the woods and you say I'm not discharging, how you regulate that? How I'm going to judge whether you're discharging or the intention to discharge? So these are the little things that bother me when I'm reading all these documentation. They sound good. They look good, about protecting the forest and stuff like that. And I think the deer population problem is the way we ruin remove all the habitat. That is how they become overpopulated, because their habitat getting smaller and smaller. So whatever number they got, eventually they're going to be overpopulated. So then the overpopulation will never cut down. It will continue on. But anyway, so this is the viewpoint that I'd like to express my frustration and my dissatisfaction with what I've been hearing. Thank you very much.
Elzbieta Kos, 123 Laurelwood Drive, Carlisle. So I have few issues with this whole idea of deer hunting. Why is it necessary to continue deer hunting in the next season, 2019? Are we so overpopulated, considering all the deer kill on the roads, which happens yearly, and it happens a lot? Also, last time I've seen deer, there were 2 babies without the mother on several occasions, and it was after deer hunting finished. This is one question. Another question is a safety issue. So, few years ago, we had a neighbor who had a deer hunter on his property, and it was abutting our property. And this was all within the regulations. However, I found 2 arrows on my property, and the deer stand was within 100 feet away from the border of my property. And another question is, if the deer hunting is so safe for the general public, why are there warning signs on each and every trail in Carlisle? Attention, deer hunting in progress. So what does it really mean? Is it so safe that we don't need, if it was so safe, we don't need these warning signs? And for the record, I have not seen any family going on these trails with children, dogs, during the deer hunt. And nobody came out of these trails. Not it was a biker, not a walker. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Finley on Rockland Road. I just have a question. You have a website, so I'm fairly ignorant on this subject, but there is a website. Is there a way you can consider putting where the stands are on the website so people that are walking the trails will know? And is there a way that you could put contact information for the hunters in case any of the abutters have issues or problems? Has that been considered? And I'm actually, thank you, hunters. It's interesting to hear your reasoning about the no Saturday. That kind of took me back. But having been somebody who's been encouraging families to go out on the trails most of my life in Carlisle, I think they do that on the weekend. So that might really support having public land be public land, you know, so, anyway.
Marge, you didn't say whether or not you want no hunting on Saturday or no hunting between 10 and 2.
I think no hunting on, I actually hadn't decided until I heard the hunter's opinion, and I was kind of swayed toward the no hunting on Saturdays. Thank you.
Anyone else who hasn't spoken yet? Anyone? All right, folks who have spoken, if you'd like to speak again.
Hi again. Just something, one of the reasons listed is conservation of the understory and preservation of the vegetation. Just wanted to point out that having 18 hunters walking daily or however often back and forth to their tree stands through gnarly, swampy land, especially on conservation land, does have an impact on the ecosystem, on that vegetation that supposedly is part of the reason you want to have this deer hunt. So there is an impact, and if there's a kill going down and, you know, getting the deer, and the area does get trampled. So, you know, that seems sort of contradicting the whole purpose of conserving the land. So I wanted to point that out. And also, I'm wondering, somebody had mentioned the potential of expanding the number of parcels, that it wasn't done this year, but is that potentially something that will be done other years? So are we looking at losing the use of additional trails on additional parcels of land in the future to hunting? Because the way I see it is, aside from the whole ethical, you know, I'm a bleeding heart, you know, I don't want the deer to suffer. But aside from that, you know, most of Carlisle is basically losing the use of 5 parcels of land, at least the comfort of using the 5 parcels of land, in order for 18 people to use that land over, you know, however many months the hunt is taking place. So are we seeing in the future the potential of losing even more of the use of the land during the fall for an even expanded hunt in the future? So, thank you.
George Mahalik, 94 Canterbury Court. I wanted to address some things that were brought up. And one thing was talked about was the success of the hunters, or lack thereof, in the case that one person was talking about. Hunting is not killing. Hunting is hunting. Nothing's guaranteed. When a hunter goes in the woods like we did this year, 18 people walked into the woods not knowing what they were doing, you know, as far as what the land was. They didn't really have time to scout it. They just kind of picked the best spot possible, put the tree stand in, and really once it's up, it's hard to move it. So they committed themselves to that spot, and they could only hunt from that one spot. Some people didn't pick good spots, and then some people don't hunt that much. I hunted, there was 480 hours I could have hunted in last year's season, the shortened season, with daylight hours during hunting times. And I hunted a total of 19 hours, and I took 2 deer because I know where the deer are. I live in town. My property abuts Davis. I was hunting Davis. I knew where the deer were at. So as successive years go on, the hunters are going to learn more and know where to put their stands and be more successful. So the numbers are going to go up. They have no other place to go but up from where they are. Now that the hunters are familiar with the topography and everything associated with it. When it comes to deer going into private property, if a deer doesn't fall immediately and they are unfortunately wounded, but fatally, mortally wounded, a hunter doesn't go right after them and push them. If the deer is running, they let them run. You wait a few hours, and then you go look for them. And I know you don't want to hear about this, but it's not like we're running through private property chasing the deer while it's running. It just doesn't happen that way. So there's no like urgency for us to get in contact with the deer agent and call the police. I mean, we let the deer sit and lay for a while and then try to go through the process. So that's not a issue. So I just wanted to talk about those two subjects. Thank you.
I'm sorry, could I get an answer to my question of whether there's consideration of expanding the number of parcels in the future? Because that was sort of what I got from a comment earlier on.
So there's no consideration right now, but I can't rule anything out of what might happen in the future. The Board of Selectmen were unambiguous about not expanding it this year.
Jeannie Schoo, 898 Maple Street. I can explain what happened last year. The Deer Committee last year, and in particular the Deer Agent, wanted to see the hunt expanded to all town land, all town properties, including conservation and Great Brook as well, which would mean the current number of hunters, it was 18, of which only 7 or 8 are Carlisle residents. It would expand to a much larger number of hunters, and it would take over, considering last year's statements. Now, I don't know if those statements have changed since last year, but it would be, if they expand the hunt to 3 months, which is what they're doing now, it would basically take all the town land, and with, again, no criteria of what the success really is, which is measurable saving of the understory. Thank you.
Could I just comment on that one? Just on
without making it a debate?
No, I just don't want to make it a debate. Just to be clear, Great Brook is not Carlisle town land. That belongs to the state. So we have no purview over Great Brook. So just want it to be really clear that we have mentioned that Great Brook is an opportunity, but that would have to go through the state and everything and all those processes as such. And Great Brook is no hunting, as per state regs.
And I guess I should add to that Great Meadows is also not under our jurisdiction. That's part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so the hunters that are there are only vetted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, not by the town of Carlisle.
I just want to use the opportunity to address one thing. Earlier, it was a statement made early in the meeting that talk about education, and training and experience. So I pick up on that, and the gentleman just stated that a hunter will go into the land without aware of what's going on. They are just as mystified about the place as everybody else. I don't know. In my generation, when we went hunting, it's not the same thing. Maybe a generation different. When we did it, we will scout the land for months before that, looking for all the possible places where the deer comes through, where to put the tree stand. So as soon as that day hit, we will be there first thing in the morning, And so that is not really what hunting is all about. I don't know, maybe the different generation, things have changed. The people just grab their weapon these days, or bow and arrow, just go to the wood and start shooting. But that's not hunting, what hunting was all about. He was right, it's not what hunting is all about. So I kind of make sure that people that never hunt before, or never been to the wood, never joined a deer hunting or any hunting party, to understand that is not hunting. That is the wrong idea of what hunting is. And I just want to make that clear to everybody that never been hunting.
A fourth time?
Yeah, why not? To answer that gentleman's question, last year when the hunt came together through the selection and the whole process of getting the people, first of all, getting the application approved and being selected and going for an interview and doing that, we ran up into a very short time that we were allowed to go into the woods and do any kind of scouting. Typically, you would scout all year long. You walk through the woods, you look for shed antlers from the season before, you get the patterns of the deer, but this kind of happened at a quick pace. We didn't have time, the hunters did not have time to thoroughly scout the area. It's not a matter of incompetence or a generational issue. We have more technology now to us with satellite maps and things like that, and we all look at those, we all look at the land, and we all picked a spot to our best guess. And that's to answer that gentleman's question about why some people didn't pick the best spot this year. So thank you.
It's still early.
Can you explain the nature of the meeting on Friday?
Sure. For the people on TV, the question is, can I explain the nature of the meeting on Friday? So we have been going around and getting public input from this. There's a number of people who couldn't be here tonight who also sent email to the conservation administrator or various members of the board here. And we're going to be taking all of that input along with the input that we got from the various boards. So I know CONSCOM has given us some input. We may get input from the Board of Health. I've solicited input from members of the Trails Committee, although they won't be having a meeting. And we're going to be taking all of that input and basically going through it and checking to see if there's changes that we can make to the regulations that would accommodate this input, right, in some way, shape, or form. Or, or whether that's not possible, or whether there's, trying to get to the underlying root concerns that people have and seeing what we can do about this kind of stuff. So I guess we'll be dissecting, abstracting, and trying to figure out how to update the regulations in some reasonable way accordingly. Okay? So I imagine lots of debate.
And the public is welcome to attend. And I'm assuming we'll still have the community input part at the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Although I think we will probably not have community input when we're actually going through the regulations. Just we need to be able to debate it amongst ourselves. So.
Right.
Yep. Yes, Jeannie. Can you step to the mic, please?
Yeah, it's just a question. There was a number of people that were talking, and they said they went to the Deer Committee site and couldn't get in touch, and they didn't know to contact. Probably, what I did is I contacted Mary Hopkins when I needed to send you an email, but some people said they didn't know how to get through. So I think you mentioned that you might be discussing that this Friday.
Yes,
to
the
do
last
that.
item on the agenda before public input is a discussion about whether or not we should create an email for the Deer Committee on the Carlisle servers. So that is, I will say, a common piece of feedback that we've heard is a way to get more direct input into the Deer Committee from the public. So I think we'll discuss and debate what we should do about that on Friday. We can't do that now, of course. This is a public input session. Anything else? Would you all like to go home? Okay, do you guys anybody want to say any final words before we wrap it up? Good.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for
Yeah, we
contributing.
appreciate the input.
And you're certainly welcome to provide comments. If you, in the short run, you can address your emails to Sylvia Willard, who's the Conservation Commission administrator.
Yep. Yeah, or Mary Hopkins, and their emails are up on the website on the Conservation Commission, so you can email them, or they have phone numbers, or they have office hours. You can stop by and talk to them. However, any vocal communication, I've asked them to ask you to please put it in writing so that we can get an exact, copy of what you said, not their interpretation of it. Okay? All right, in that case, I think, since it's just a public input session, I don't need a vote to adjourn, so we'll just adjourn, right?
All right.
All right.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.